your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I am Richard Dugan, Reverend Dr. D, and we have with us a very special guest who has written a very interesting book and has an interesting subject to share with us, as well as a website we'll give you shortly. Stuart Grauer is my guest. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us. You and I, interestingly enough, and I love talking to people in the same time zone. You and I are both here in California, as opposed to some of the interviews I've done with people in India and Ireland and all parts of the world. Thanks to the technological advancements that have come about in the 46 or 47 years that I've been in this business. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm in the time zone. I've always had a challenge with respect to time. Maybe I'm timeless, but I was the head of school at the Grauer School and elsewhere before that for so many years that I always kept a good calendar so that when people walked in, I pretended that I knew they were on time. But in fact, it's kind of all a big surfing flow for me.
Well, for me too. I mean, especially now that my wife and I live where we live and I'm able to work remotely 100% of the time, I sometimes forget what day it is, let alone what time it is. So it can be an interesting challenge. You've written this very interesting book that ties into what we're going to talk about today, obviously, and the book is entitled "The Way to PANCHO'S Kitchen." It's a trail guide for small school leaders, and you blend basically field-tested lessons with vivid storytelling. Storytelling is what it's all about here, from the Grand Canyon to Baja, to help learning community leaders reclaim the roots of education and sustain it for life. I'm curious, I'm going to jump in here first with this question having to do with where our educational system is today, because there are so many people, and I'm not one of them, please, there are so many people who are so critical of our educational system in America. In the United States, I should say. And I'm wondering, what is your assessment overall of the educational system in America? Is it that bad? Does it need to be overhauled? Or are we basically hearing from a minority of screamers and yellers who maybe had bad experiences and are basically lashing out in that respect? What's your assessment of our current educational system?
Richard, I should have known you were going to ask me mountainous questions. First off, the the educational systems across the country, and I've visited many, many of them, are filled with fantastic teachers. And so it is certainly not our teachers that are broken, but it's also true that the systems that they're in, many of them are very stuck. And I started noticing this at the very beginning of my career in a kind of a search for a more liberating educational environment. But with respect to today, which was your question, since I've been studying this in schools and what the issues are with them, for over 120 years, school sizes, district sizes, classroom sizes have all continually, steadily grown to the point where the thing we call school now, and that a lot of people sort of think of as the real world, has very little relationship to what teachers have historically and traditionally done. And that's why a lot of alternative schools are refusing even to use the word teacher now. And that's a pity. They're so I'm going to go way out on a limb here right at the beginning.
Okay.
Take a look at what's happening over in Iran. Why is the greatest, most powerful force in the world unable to make any sense out of subjugating another country and quickly and easily when we have all this power? And the reason is we are a bloated, corporate, gigantically bureaucratic culture, and that's what our schools have become. They're huge so that people can't be known in them. And Ukraine is teaching us all we need to know about education, and that is that we don't need to be bloated corporations. We can be drones. And that's really what's happening right now. So two things are happening in education right now. A lot of reform and complaint from people who realize these systems are not ones where you can actually be known. And then this thing that really got a huge reboot, if not start, during the pandemic, where millions of people were out of school, and we thought they'd all come back, and hundreds of thousands of them did not. And so teachers and families have been leaving the profession and looking for something else, and we now have a number of fascinating new school models, which is a whole lot better than complaining about the system. And that's always been my thing, is not attempting to resist large institutions that I'm in, but rather trying to find human scale organizations that I can create or be in.
Mm-hmm. GrauerSchool.com is the website that we want people to go to check out the work that you are doing. And if I'm understanding you then, one of the aspects of this is epitomized by something one of my guests mentioned. And when I said, so does that mean when it comes to something, I use a phrase, we're looking for those new ways of living, the old ways don't work, just look around you. I said, so do we tear down the old institutions and build the new ones? And he said, oh, God, no, don't do that. What you want to do is build the new institutions, if you will, that make the old ones obsolete. And it sounds to me like that's what you're doing by encouraging, shall we say, smaller schools. Now, I, growing up, used to watch Little House on the Prairie, and they would have those scenes where they were in the schoolroom. And you were teaching all the kids that were in the area, in the rural area, and they were all at different ages. And so they were all being taught at different levels. Right. But they were all in the same room because that's all you had was a one-room schoolhouse, right?
Yeah.
Well, certainly we have greater capabilities today. We can have multiple schoolrooms. But if there are people getting out of this profession, is your model of, shall we call it downsizing, Is
Ken?
it starting to take hold? Has it taken hold to the point where some of the folks that have gotten out are coming back, reconsidering coming back, and so forth? Because it for them, it is more uh, sustainable, if you will. It's more manageable because I don't have 40 or 50 kids in one room and I'm trying to keep the peace
Uh-huh.
and then try to teach them or facilitate their education, maybe is a better way to put it.
Yeah. So first off, with respect to uh, what I call age mixing, that is the oldest form of teaching.
Mhm.
And when we assign somebody to be the teacher and everybody else to be the student, you're missing most of the learning that can be going on. And the greatest teachers I know are the greatest learners, and we swap the title and the role and the identity of teacher and student all the time. One of the most beautiful, fun learning environments I've ever had was years ago. I taught a class of grades 3 through 8, and in some areas, we were doing our own things, and I would rove around the room and try to assist. Other things, like when we learned Spanish together, we all did it together, or music. And so age mixing isn't something you do all the time. It's for certain subjects. Uh, and we've lost that by making our schools institutions which get divided up and segmented so that people don't even see each other, and people of different interests can't really mentor others very well.
Mm.
So a smaller learning environment, it's much easier to mix people, to have mentoring programs. But any size school could be more serious about creating mentoring programs and age mixed programs. You can do that. You just have to, and it's one of the best ideas I have for schools to start to reclaim a sense of flourishing and mattering among kids. With respect to are the people that left the schools during the pandemic coming back, the answer is not yet. They're still leaving. Teachers are still leaving the profession in unfortunate numbers, or else, but many of them going to start learning pods or micro schools, and that movement is emergent right now. There are there's a more educational entrepreneurship and creativity than any time I've ever seen in 50 years in the business. The types of learning models that are being created right now, and there are 200,000 micro schools in the country. There were very few before 2020,
Mm.
uh, and learning pods in very small schools. So the model that I was doing 35 years ago, were gathering a few kids together, in my case in a borrowed storefront, and when they got there saying, "What do you want to do today?" And having the kids say, "Well, we have to be here." And I said, "No, you don't." "Well, our parents are making us." "No, they aren't," and pushing back until we share purposes. That's got to happen, and that's going to take a few more years before people start hopefully folding in some of these emergent school models into the larger school districts before they fall apart like old carcasses. I don't think they have to, Richard. I think we can create schools within schools. I think we can have magnets and specialty schools and age mixed sections of them. I visited a school in Nanjing, China, where they'd taken out a whole wing and made it an English language learning school. That
Mm.
was perfect, and that's over 10 years ago. And we can be doing a lot of these creative things, but if at some point today, if you want to get into some of the actual models that are being developed right now that are going to take a while to solidify before they, and then after that, I'm envisioning they could be incorporated back in the public schools, unless the large district schools are going to collapse. I hope they won't. I hope we can just keep refiguring them, because our public school system uh, is one of the most valuable things in our country, and I
Yeah.
hate to see it turning into a bureaucracy.
And I want to touch upon something else in that regard as well, in terms of what is being taught in the schools in general, before we dive into the structure of some of these small schools that you have been working on. But do you recall seeing a scene? And I wish I could remember the name of either A, the movie, or B, the television series, but it was with Jeff Daniels. And he's on this dais up on the stage with a group of these people and he happens to be from the media, and they're being tossed questions from the audience. And this one young gal gets up, college age kid, and basically asks him point blank, why do you think that the United States of America is the greatest country in the world? And he basically says it's not. And he starts quoting certain aspects and throws in, of course, we're like 47th in education and so on and so on and so on. And I'm wondering, there's the accusation on the part of some, and I happen to only associate with them only because it was where I worked back in the 80s and early 90s. They would use the term indoctrination, and that we need to stop this indoctrination in our public schools, and so on and so forth. Or we need to open up our own schools so that we can educate kids and so forth. And I'm thinking, whoa, back up. You don't want your kids to be indoctrinated in the public school system. However, you refuse to use the same word when talking about the educational system that you want to institute.
Right.
Which to me has always been a bugaboo with me, when people start they start making these outlandish statements about a lot of things, but specifically about our educational system. And It's like, I'm sorry, but that's the pot calling the kettle black, if you will.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I was born and raised legally blind. My present wife, was born with dyslexia. Now, I was fortunate. I came along about 9 years later than she. So the system she went through, they probably didn't know much of anything in the late 50s and 60s about dyslexia. And so she didn't really get the help that she really needed.
Right.
Now, when I met her, she hated reading out loud. I encouraged her. I said, look, it's just you and me. And she reads really well now. I was fortunate. I had a resource teacher through grade school and even into high school. And so I was able to get through. I would say I was a C student, and that was fine with me. I mean, I wasn't looking to be an A student. I wasn't trying to get into Harvard or Princeton or any place else. I just wanted to get through the 12 years so that I could decide and try to figure out which direction I wanted to go.
Sure.
Do you think that this is part of the bloating, maybe? That, and again, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but is there maybe that part of the bloating that these kids, these young people who have these different, I'll call them conditions, cannot really get the individualized support and assistance that they desperately need to learn something, not just rote memorization, but actually to learn something.
Yeah.
Or is it some of the other things? It's like, how is it that we've had to incorporate? I mean, I know back in the 60s, from what I understand, maybe even in the 50s, there was this program where they would teach kids how to duck and cover, as if that would really do anything if there was an atomic blast. But there are so many factions that want so many different things taught or kids exposed to, or in some instances not exposed to, so they start banning books, that this is sort of the bloating, if you will, of the current system, and that we need to figure out how to, oh my goodness, incorporate the group education without ignoring the individual needs.
Right. And I think that is a bloating issue, Richard.
Okay.
We're creating bureaucracies which are so huge that they get regimented, and the only way to solve problems is create more and more programs and spend more and more money. When in this smaller learning community, you don't need to label and break down every issue. Somebody who had a vision problem or a reading delay would be naturally incorporated. They'd have mentoring. They would matter. They would have that motivation. And a lot of this has to do with the way it feels to be in a school, even though these are real challenges. The fact is you can't just throw a program at them and make the school bigger and more expensive to solve them that way. So it's bloody. An ostensible reason for having our schools, our public schools, is to advance American democracy. And yet, why is it that the American schools are among the least democratic institutions in our country? And how do we think that we're going to meet individual needs and give everybody an individual voice and address their learning fascinations and needs in this way? So I just call it the bigness, and the bigness is not necessary. The funding formulas that people use to claim that we need to consolidate schools and make them bigger and bigger on efficiency models are lies. Bigger schools don't produce as much high achievement. The teachers are more likely to leave statistically. Larger schools, the safety that kids express at larger schools compared to smaller schools is not the same at all. And I'm not talking only about shootings and bullying. I'm also talking about emotional safety. And even the safety when you start putting kids on buses. Yet another factor that's left out of funding formulas when they continue to consolidate schools and make them bigger and bigger and bigger. So you asked if this is in recovery yet, and the answer is no. They're still consolidating schools and making them bigger. And these schools that are out in the country on the edge of town that get smaller and smaller, instead of sharing them with local organizations and putting clubs there and, busing kids out there even if they have to, they'll just close them down and bus everybody into more and more centralized regions, and the problems get worse. We need to knock that off. The local community is a place that treasures its local community schools, and we need to do everything possible to make those available and keep those open so that the costs of teachers leaving and people being unhappy and safety and busing can be addressed better, and the sense of belonging. Because, and I'm going to, and I hope this isn't going out on a limb, but I'm going to say every problem that you described, including reading delays and whether or not you can be included with a sight disadvantage, are much ameliorated in smaller learning communities where you have a high acceptance and where you feel like you matter.
I know that's very important these days too, to not only be heard and seen, but also to know that you make a difference, that you do matter. I will applaud my mother especially because one of the phrases or one of the things that she told me probably in my middle teens when I was in high school, and this was sort of a private conversation, but I and my siblings have talked about this since. She said to me, "Richard, you are unique. I knew that you were going to be special, when I was carrying you and so forth." Yeah. Well, the conversation that I had with my other siblings was, and you've probably guessed this already, she said that to all of us. And I remember when I found that out, at first I was a little dejected, but I thought more about it. I'm thinking, well, no, wait a minute. That doesn't change anything. Because we are, each one of us. I mean, my brother, who is in his mid-60s, almost there, I guess. I think he's 64. Okay. He is going to actually be a biological father for the first time. Now he lives right now in Vietnam, spends most of his time there with his partner. And there's a part of me that wants to text him because we've been staying in touch. He's been helping me with a little project here at the house. I want to text him and say, what made you want to become a father now? I mean, you're going to be in your 80s by the time this kid graduates. Of course, I don't know what the school systems are like in Vietnam and if they're going to stay there or what have you. But I just thought, wow, that is really actually very cool. I made a different choice, and I don't have any offspring, but I've got sisters who do. I've got three. I've got three nieces, and I've got a grandniece and a grandnephew. And I guess I'm going to be an uncle. I guess it's going to be a boy. And they've actually given him apparently a Vietnamese name. And every time he texts, the name that he shows, there's the letter E in the name of the child that's to be born, has a little accent over it. And I'm going, how did he do that? I mean, I don't have that keyboard, but it's really very cool. We're talking with Stuart Grauer. We're talking, of course, about education and, of course, his book, which is called The Way to PANCHO'S Kitchen. It's a trail guide for small school leaders. We're going to continue our conversation as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I am Reverend Dr. D. He is Stuart Grauer, and we are talking about our educational system, but the bringing into this world and the teaching, if you will. There's of our children, of our people that we bring into this world. And we've brought almost 8.5 billion people into this world. And and you have to wonder sometimes, okay, what is their educational level, or what are they going to become? I mean, we talk, Stuart, regularly about encouraging people to find their life's purpose. You have obviously found yours at this time in your life. You've got a number of awards and acknowledgments and accolades, and that's all fine, well, and good. But does any of that really matter to you in the grand scheme of things in terms of what it is that you want to accomplish, and what do you want to accomplish with this work, as well as the book, The Way to PANCHO'S Kitchen?
Yeah, what do I want to accomplish? Well, first of all, I do like goals, and because it means you've identified some passion that's worth it to you. I don't like pre-formulated goals, and that may be a problem with a lot of the teaching that goes on. You're expected to automatically charge into somebody else's goals, and it turns out that a lot of our best straight A students are just the best at being compliant. But yeah, I love the awards that I've received because they represent successful relationships that I've had with a number of people. I didn't always. I went through, I think, deep and somewhat painful times before I really understood where I was headed. I knew where I was drawn, but where I was drawn didn't exist particularly in official pathways. They always seemed narrow, and so when I first started teaching, I wondered why everybody always seemed to be following this rule book that I didn't have. And so on the surface, I had a nice job, but I didn't understand what teaching really meant. My first job, I shipped out to the Atlantic Ocean on a big schooner 6 weeks before school ended, and when I got back, not surprisingly, I got fired. And not only fired from my first teaching job, but the wonderful principal told me that I wasn't cut out for teaching and shouldn't go in the field. So I hope that's a message to people that I was really not cut out for what teaching was becoming. I was in my second job. I was teaching European history. This was early enough that it became world history. I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember that we used to call European history the history of the world because we kind of discounted what Asian and indigenous cultures were doing. And maybe there's some regression to that even today. um, which would be kind of sad.
Yeah.
But anyway, on that, I started filling up my room with pictures of mountains all over the world, and I quit that job too and took a job in the Swiss Alps. Uh, and very lucky to get that, and really found myself as a teacher for the first time. But again, it wasn't in the official channels. I was searching for something and didn't know the definition of success unless it was finding where you belonged rather than fitting yourself into the machine. And I've never been good at doing that. And I've never thought that it was a bad thing that other people could. I have always admired them, but it's hard when you don't belong. So that eventually that drew me to people who had founded schools, who I met in the Swiss Alps, and then I studied at the University of San Diego to get my doctorate in educational leadership, so I could actually move into this founder stage, where you're early in your career. Success is finding an intuition that you feel like it's worth pursuing, and later on in that founder stage, it's more like taking that ground and making it real and creating your own values and your own beauty. And yeah, ultimately, I think that becoming a teacher is the same as becoming an artist.
I know too that when it comes to teaching, there are some who will get in it knowing, as I did, getting into broadcasting, there's no money in it. There really isn't. It's self-satisfaction more than anything else. Unless of course you're really, really good, and you get to move up in the ranks and you get tenure and all those kinds of things. But it doesn't have that same financial allure, and that's one of the, I suppose, I want to say one of the pluses, if you will, from the standpoint that if you really want to be a teacher, it isn't about the money. Now, it's a challenge, there's no question. I've seen plenty of documentaries as well as talked with teachers who have been very challenged by not only the lack of adequate income in terms of, they should at least get babysitter pay. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But because sometimes that's the way parents view it. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and we'll talk too, of course, about all of this in lieu of this new book that you have out that came out in March of 2026, or I should say April, The Way to PANCHO'S Kitchen. That's the title of the book. It's a trail guide for small school leaders, and we are talking with the author, Stuart Grauer, here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Reverend Dr. D, and Stuart, I have written a book. And I never thought I would per se. I thought, I've got ideas. I might write short stories. I will tell you, one of my favorite teachers in high school, Southwest literature class, Mr. Miller. I don't know that I ever knew his first name, but we would write short stories of all different genres. And I remember the red pen remarks that were written on the front page of most of my stories, praising the story, saying, you need to continue this. You need to, elongate or embellish or expand upon this story. This is really good.
Love that.
I will tell you that one of my favorite happenings in class one day, we were all sitting there quietly, I want to say reading or writing, I forget which. And the school that I was in, the high school that I was in Phoenix, had very thin walls. And the class next door was watching a film. Don't know what it was, never did find out. And all of a sudden you heard what sounded like a choir of angels. I was, that kind of thing, right? And my head went up and I looked around and I could not resist saying, "It's Judgment Day." And the whole class everybody just broke up laughing. And then, of course, Miller calmed us all down and we went back to reading. But it's like when I got out of high school, and most kids feel this way, if I can just get through these 12 years, don't drop out. I want to just get my diploma, and then I can decide what I want to do. And of course, a lot of parents, they want their kids to go to college. What's
Right.
your thought about that mentality of, in a manner of speaking, forcing kids following high school graduation, saying, no, you're going to college. We've set aside X number of dollars, blah, 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 blah. Do you think college is really for everybody? I went to junior college and a vocational school. That's it. My sisters all went to university for, I think, a minimum of 4 years. My brother went to a vocational school, DeVry, and became an electrical engineer for who? Walt Disney. All right. Right here in California. So what about that? Do you really think that higher education of that sort, that of course has gotten very, very expensive,
Yeah.
is really something that should be maybe plan B, plan C, and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, it was really disheartening and just devastating to watch 10, 20 years ago. So many colleges across the country raise their prices radically and then turn that into debt. And we watched it happen and we knew it was going to implode. And now it is. And now a lot of colleges and universities are being challenged to actually use their endowment funds as intended. So we got a lot of backlash, as we should have, from universities with respect to should everybody go. I don't think everybody should automatically go to college, but I do think there is a college for everybody who's willing. Where I have trouble is where we say, oh, well, the liberal arts colleges and the colleges across the country are overpriced and getting everybody into debt, and they're elitist. Therefore, we need to get everybody into much more technology and vocational education. And the reason I have trouble with that is because one of the most beautiful things about American culture and our democracy is how much time and space historically it's given our kids to find themselves. Mm-hmm. And having worked in European schools and traveled widely and worked closely with Chinese educators and Korean educators, and seeing the pressure that's on those kids to get, take tests and get put into whatever their track is going to be at crazy early ages. And I just treasure, I finally figured out what I was going to maybe do sometime in my late 20s. And I treasure that. And if I had been in a Chinese system and put into my supposed life track early on, I just can't even imagine having a free life. And to me, that's what this is all about. The ultimate universal value that teachers are seeking is freedom. So I'm all about freedom. And if it means making vocational and technological education just as available as universities, that's fine. If it means sorting people out early, like what happens in most countries in the world, then count me out.
Mm. Well, it's very interesting because you bring up a very fascinating perspective on this from the standpoint. I've interviewed a number of people regarding business and doing business in other countries. One gal, this massive book, talking about doing business in China. And she made the point very clear. And this kind of goes to what you said earlier about what's going on in the Middle East today. She says you cannot go into China and conduct business the way you would in the United States. If it doesn't get you thrown in jail, it'll probably get you thrown out of the country, or at the very least, they'll have nothing to do with you because you are not showing the due respect to the people who live and work and so forth in China, regardless of their political affiliations and so forth. This is business. I have a feeling that the same thing can be said pretty much around the world when it comes to our dealings with people in other countries, whether it be business or whether it be this conflict that's currently going on. And there's a certain phrase that I know you've heard many times, and that is that those who refuse to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I was watching a video. They were running down the list in the last, let's just say 50 or 60 years of our dealings with the countries in the Middle East.
Uh-huh.
And ostensibly, we've lost every single time. And it's like, and this is going to be different because this guy is running the show. I mean, we can't even get a straight answer as to why we are there, let alone how we're going to get out. We didn't learn from Russia in Afghanistan. They were there for 10 years or 20 years. And then we wasted 10 years of our time, our resources, including our people. And we ended up having to back out, and so on and so forth. And so it just seems to me that there's this arrogance within the American mindset, the U.S. American mindset, that says, no, if you want to do business with us, you're going to do it our way. And they won't. They flat out won't. Do you think that we are, and you in particular, but other people in your field, are we looking at other countries the way that they are teaching, if you will, their young people that is different from ours, that could very well improve what our students have when their formal education is all set and done?
Yeah, I think being a student today in a large school sounds an awful lot like the way you described doing business in China. I think the ultimate thing that a teacher in every single subject has to learn how to teach is peace. And we haven't done a good job of that. And that is more present in other countries around the world. And we're starting to learn a lot of wonderful things. But our educational system, as far as educational rankings, is dropping. But we're learning some of the new emerging school models are picking up things that we learn from Europe. Obviously Montessori and Reggio Emilia started in Italy. And these are freeing, liberating. We have forest school movements going on in Japan and Scandinavia. We have small school movements going on in Europe, and the Finnish one is particularly strong. In Finland, it was ranked again the top educational system in the world and the happiest country in the world. And one of my dear friends is the head of the small schools of Finland, and they've been fighting to keep those alive, and so that we can continue our regional specialties and regional differences. But an interesting thing is occurring. One of the worst trends of global education, which is also the worst trend that you hear about in the United States, which is the test-driven approach. And so we claim that our schools are about excellence, or we're the fighting tigers or whatever we are. But in fact, what our school purposes a lot of times boil down to is proving to the superintendent and to the district and to the state that you're getting the right math scores and reading scores. And we're reducing schools to those. That started, of course, with the No Child Left Behind Act in the early 80s, and really just destroyed so much of what was great about education and the regional differences. And it reduced education to this race. But I want to point out something good that's happening with that.
Sure, please, yes.
Because we also had that trend all over the world, and you heard about, the Gaokao in China, that they shut down the whole country so the kids can take several days of exams so that they can be sorted out to where they're going to go, and all over the country. And we compare these by what's called the PISA scores. and that is an international ranking, which when you hear which countries are the best in the world and the worst in the world and so on, and the United States ranks something like 23 now, right next to Mexico. Uh, those are historically were also based on math and reading scores. And so I have been in contact with the PISA people, and they're now starting to incorporate character education, emotional intelligence, which might sound like a soft skill, but it is not. You cannot function, you cannot flourish, you cannot learn more than just memorization and rote unless you have a peace of mind and a sense of safety and a sense of mattering, like we were talking before. So the PISA people now are actually starting to incorporate some of these emotional intelligence measures, which are reliable and measurable. And I don't think people understand that. And I want everybody to understand that you can measure things like resourcefulness, compassion, and perseverance, and sense of safety and sense of mattering. And you can rank schools according to those just as well as you can rank algebra and reading. And so they're going to be incorporating those and also sending the PISA into the United States so we can be measured along with all those other countries, but including these new measures of character and emotional development, which matters so much. So that's, to me, a really wonderful, and actually the Grauer School may be included among the very first cohort of American schools ever to be included in the PISA rankings, just as they start to test out their systems there. So that's a good movement too, the beginning of taking emotional intelligence and character development and values development just as seriously as we take algebra and reading.
I want to ask you in regards to the ranking, if you will,
Uh-huh.
but from the perspective, what does that say to the students of our primary and secondary educational facilities? I'll put it that way. What does that say to them when the adults are criticizing the system, saying it's the worst, it's 47th or 48th in this country, and out of 190 some odd countries, I guess it's 190, 195, 200, we may show up somewhere in 160, 170, 175, 180. But what does that do to the mind and the heart of the student here in this country when they hear that?
I don't believe that our students are hearing that much of that. They're hearing more of a drift, and the drift from those comments is that right now, despite all a lot of us are saying about emotional development and character and values development, they hear that, but they don't fully embrace it yet. And even at the most beautiful schools, they can't avoid that drift of pressure. I got to get this rank. I've got to get into this college. And it just, Richard, it just ruins everything. And we're right now in dire straits. We have record levels of depression and anxiety. And what causes that is a sense that school and life is a requirement to get somewhere rather than to be engaged in a process, to go deep down and just you're not, school isn't a rehearsal for adulthood, and it shouldn't be specifically. The purpose of school is not to get into college. That's a great outcome for a lot of kids. The purpose of school is to get into it and dig down and to have the greatest conversations of the world and to develop your purposes, not being handed your purposes. And that's what causes things like depression, where you're frustrated, you're trying to get somewhere, but you don't know where it is and you don't know why. But the why there is you're sold that it's not really about you. It's about getting to this end goal that everybody's talking about. That's kind of somehow telegraphed to you. Those kids are picking up on those prescribed ends that they're supposed to do, even though they know on the surface and are being told by many people, no, 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 we just really want you to go where you belong. They kind of believe it and they kind of don't. And they're dealing with this, it's an ambiguity is the real answer to your question.
Yeah, you know, and I'm a firm believer that words have power. Okay. And the things that we say to ourselves and to other people make a difference. And it's pretty obvious, and that's the case. But the other thing, too, is that the examples that we have been given, whether we're young people or whether we're adults, have influence. And we've got in some instances, we have some really bad examples out there when it comes to leadership. But we also have, Stuart, and I want to say this, I believe I'm correct in this, in you, we also have some very good examples of leadership, because I haven't heard yet from you in our conversation that you have an agenda, that you have an axe to grind, that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the statements about how bad our U.S. educational system is, blah, blah, blah. You've recognized that there's room for improvement. That's now the phrase that I use quite regularly, that it may not be perfect, but just like you and I, there's always room for improvement. We're always trying to better ourselves, right? And that's what you're trying to do here, right?
Yeah, I'm not. The Grauer School and the book "The Way to PANCHO'S Kitchen" is not a condemnation of anything in the past, and it's. I'm not trying to slay dragons here. I'm trying to build communities or villages that are outside of the dragon's reach, and so this is really a search for freedom, and so I guess the greatest value I could express right now is openness, and that's what I want for our kids. I want them to go into school, and I want this for our teachers too, all of them together, to be able to go into the classroom with an open mind and, you know, say, well, maybe I do like the idea of teacher in the Socratic sense.
Yeah.
Socratic sense being we're going in there open just to find out, just to study together, not with the big agenda, your word.
I hear quite often this one phrase, primarily used in political circles, but I think it's still applicable in all of our lives: transparency. And in many of our institutions, they claim it, but I don't see it. I don't see it. And there's a phrase that I have used over and over again. I usually use it towards governments, all governments. If you have secrets to keep, you have secrets to keep. If you have no secrets to keep, you have no secrets to keep. And I'll put it on to a personal note, my personal beliefs, my personal philosophy. I believe there is a supreme being, if you will, God, okay, the divine, etc. I also believe, and again, I say believe, I don't know this, that this supreme being knows everything about me. Everything. I can't hide anything from this divine, if you will. Ergo, what difference does it make if 8.4 billion people know, and most of them don't care because they're too busy living their lives? And what you, I think, are trying to get across to folks is we need to start living our lives. We need to stop, we need to take responsibility. I want to talk about that. I want to first let our listeners know we're talking with Stuart Grauer and his book, of course, The Way to PANCHO'S Kitchen. It's a trail guide for small school leaders here on Tell Me Your Story. So I am Reverend Dr. D, and he is Stuart Grauer. And Stuart, let's talk about this concept, if you will. And I'm wondering if this is somehow incorporated. It's maybe a subtext, as they talk about in acting. My acting coach years ago told me, yeah, you do have the words on the page, but then there's subtext underneath.
Yeah.
The subtext, is there a subtext of, in terms of teaching, but also being the leader, in a leadership position, of personal responsibility?
In my concept of leadership right now is focused on a couple of things. One of them is differentiating it from management. And all too often people go into either founding a school or moving into an existing school, public, private, anything, and turning it into a checklist. So my responsibility is to be a leader, which means I don't follow checklists. I follow trails, waves, dogs, canyons, kids, and just the voice. And I think that managers are needed with respect to establishing controls, but I think where people fall short is understanding leadership as a function that liberates. Those are two almost opposite functions, aren't they?
Mm.
And so that's my responsibility right now is to provide environments and logic and rationale where people can reclaim the freedom that we're supposed to be all about, and to create those conditions for freedom.
Mm. And that is an interesting word to use, freedom. I think about the Declaration of Independence and that first few lines there, the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's talk a little bit about that before we wrap things up. Do you think, and I've asked this question of many of my guests in regards to that third inalienable right, of which there are many more, but in this case, what's down on in ink on parchment, do you think that that the founding fathers knew something intuitively? And if so, what do you think that was?
Well, remember, they weren't constrained by the gross institutionalization and corporatization that we have to face right now in order to maintain freedom. And we're told through our school system, and then once we enter the job market, that there's a kind of a pecking order, and that the purpose of this thing is just to kind of get to the top of this thing rather than to pursue freedom. So people aren't really taught to pursue freedom. As I was mentioning before, the schools, the larger school districts in our nation are among the least democratic institutions in the country. And there are specific opportunities for our schools to start to adopt programs that engender greater freedom in the schools. That's why there's such a strong self-directed learning movement right now. All over the world, schools are either recreating and starting from scratch so that students can be completely self-directed, or any school of any size can start to look around and ask itself, in studying all of its systems, where can we provide more student voice? Where do we already have that? Let's celebrate that. And in every single program, there are opportunities to either celebrate or find opportunities to give students greater voice. And I think in doing that, we need to empower teachers much more, or they're going to keep leaving the system. And right now, when I'm talking with distraught large district teachers who are just in tears about this, I'll say, well, I love that you're complaining about this, but you have to either risk your job or close the door and do your thing. I hate to do that because I'm more about seeking my own purposes than bucking some kind of system. Remember, you're talking with somebody. I was a tenured public school teacher, and I left that system to teach in the Alps, and I left that system to found my own school. So I've done that, and if anybody needs um, further support and encouragement for either creating or developing more liberating systems wherever they are, that's why I've written this book. That every single chapter is kind of more and more and more permission and strategy and mindset and encouragement to live a more liberating life as we reclaim what it really means to be a teacher.
What is the? We'll wrap things up here in just a moment. What is the shall we say the universal definition of teacher or educator or whatever other term you have used in this context of? And I love the word from Stranger in a Strange Land, to get our students to grok, not rote memorization, but actually to grok the information that's being presented to them.
Yeah, and I think that that's an interesting metaphor for the day, because Grok is the name of one of our preeminent AI programs. And I know AI is being seen as a big threat right now, but that's not what it needs to be, and not what I hope it will become. I hope it will become the pathway that we all can take for our endless curiosity. Don't forget that Grok and Chat and GPT are among the best listeners we're ever going to experience, and we can go down and pursue our imaginations endlessly there. And so we're worrying about the opposite thing. We're worrying about, oh, well, kids are going to use it to cheat, as opposed to use it for the fact that you're going to have one of the most intelligent, endlessly curious creatures or beings. You're surrounded by a brilliant thing there, and it's endlessly curious about you. And that's really what the Socratic model of teaching started out being. And that's what a teacher is. A teacher is someone who makes you feel loved and seen and known. That's teacher. And remember, Jesus was called rabbi. That means, translated, teacher. Guru, that means teacher. All the greatest teachers that we have that gave us role models, all the greatest thinkers and philosophers were known as teacher. Einstein, one of the most brilliant geniuses we've ever known, was unable to get a teaching job when he first started out. And I relate to that. But at the end of his career, after he'd done all his great achievements, he became a teacher at Princeton. So most of my heroes are teachers.
Stuart Grauer's my guest. I'm Reverend Dr. D. Richard Dugan. This is Tell Me Your Story. Letting you know, folks, this is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Reverend Dr. D, and he is Stuart Grauer. And Stuart, fascinating conversation, no question about it. The thing that I want to touch upon real quick is this concept, or this aspect, in terms of the bloatedness, if you will, of our current educational system, which we can lose some weight. It is possible, okay? What is your thought in regards to some of the things that are being said about how people want to bring into the public school system specifically these, I'm going to call them symbols of their respective faiths, or maybe their communities' respective faiths and or beliefs, and I also like to refer to them as philosophies. What are your thoughts in that regard?
I think that there's something good and something bad about it. The bad news is that a lot of it comes from political maneuvering and ego and control, when in fact the universal values that the great spiritual and religious leaders have brought forth have been to liberate people, not to control them. That's not the way religions have always worked, and that's not the way the people that are bringing these symbols into the schools are working. These are control measures. Having said that, I think that the search for universal values is the highest form of education. So I hope that occurs. Mm-hmm. So even though I might not bring the Ten Commandments into the school, ironically, I would be perfectly happy bringing in the Sermon on the Mount. And there are certain values that we all can try to seek that are universal. Compassion, love, kindness, probably perseverance, and those. I think if we can get together and discuss which values are the most universal, and find ways to bring them into the schools, that would be doing it in a non-rote, non-controlling way. And I might add, most importantly of all, that search for universal values is not something that distant boards and superintendents and governments can do. I think it's something that students do. If we are serious about developing a democratic country and culture.
Well, it certainly is something that is part of who and what we are, and it's hard to escape it regardless because we carry it with us all the time. But at the same time, because of what we have as our founding documents, there are those who will use that to say, no, 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 you've got separation here. But at the same time, we also have freedom. You talked about that earlier, freedom of expression, freedom of belief, freedom of the press, and all of these different things that are very important. And it's not a question. And I loved what someone was saying in regards during the shutdown during COVID 6 years ago, where they were complaining that the government was infringing. And I said, what do you mean infringing? I have the same rights that you have. I'm exercising my let's say First Amendment rights by masking up, washing my hands, and staying at least 6 feet away from you. Now, I have to tell you that when we were first told to stay home, the first thing that went through my mind was, if we'll do this for 2 months, it'll be over. If we'll just do this for 2 months. However, that other mindset of individuality became very inculcated, and people refused to do it. And that's why it went on. I believe, I don't know this. Once again, my belief. I don't know this, but I believe that that's the reason why it went on as long as it did in this country. I've advocated since I was 15 years old. 15. That was 45 years ago, Stuart. That when the influenza, which circles the globe every year and comes across our shores once a year, if we were to shut down the airlines for 2 weeks, 2 weeks, it would die. But they say, oh, no, you can't do that to the economy. Well, now I say, well, look back at 2020. All right. Guess what? It's 2026 and we're still here. And the airlines were shut down for a heck of a lot longer than that. Yeah. So it is something that we can do, these different possibilities. And of course, the young people that you are involved with in terms of getting them educated, and the programs, the structures you've created to share with other educational bodies to educate our kids, those kids will grow up, I hope, to have the critical thinking skills to be able to solve some of the problems that we just, for whatever reason, have not been able to solve. And they are solvable, but I think there's an element that's missing, and that is the willpower to do it. Setting aside how much money the stockholders and the shareholders might not get, and say, well, what's better for our society, what's better for our community, what's better for our families is, and this is the way we're going to do it, you know? And if it doesn't work, we can go back to the old ways. I mean, isn't that one of the beautiful things is you can try it, and if it doesn't work, then we'll just go back and do it the way we've always done it, right?
I hope so. I hope so.
I thank you
You know,
so
I,
much for your input on this program today and for the book that you've written. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, it is called The Way to Pancho's Kitchen. I realized we didn't talk too much about Pancho and his kitchen, but we do have an idea of what he was concocting in said kitchen. It is a trail guide for small school leaders, and it is written by our guest. His name is Stuart Grauer. And again, thank you so much for being here.
thank you, and I hope everyone listening will feel as liberated and empowered as writing this book made me feel.
Well, we are going to encourage people to go to your website. And ladies and gentlemen, that website happens to be grauerschool.com. That's GRAUERSCHOOL.com. We'll be linked to that as well. I do have three final questions I ask all of my guests, Stuart. But before I ask you those three questions, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and we're here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We have podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. We are also on YouTube and Rumble. We hope that you will subscribe as well as click notification. And we hope that you will pick up a copy of my book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life. It is available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. We also hope that you can leave us a tip. We have a tip jar. It's called PayPal, and we can use all the help we can get. There's always room for improvement, and financial support is part of the process as well. So if you can, this is just an ask, we would appreciate it. Just go to PayPal and put in my email address, richard@richarddugan.com. Send what you can. We'll take energetic support as well. And finally, we ask that you take some time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And now with our final three questions for a very special guest. Number one is, who is Stuart Grauer?
Well, I am a teacher and a surfer and a writer, and I pick those because they're so adaptable and so open. And I want to say that they all go beyond job titles. And I was a teacher for about 50 years, but about every 3 years, my job was completely different than in the years before. And yet, throughout it all, whether I was a head of school or a professor, I always, whenever people asked me what I was, I always said teacher. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. What gets you up in the morning?
The sun. Unusually, most people I know sleep with the drapes closed, but I don't. I always leave everything wide open, and I get up with the sun, and that also gets me to bed earlier because my natural cycle is in accordance with that. But what also gets me up in the sun, when that sun gets me up, what's also getting me up is an enormous amount of energy. I definitely have worn some people out. I don't know where all this energy comes from. I usually get up and race right down to the surf. I don't do that because it's a decision. I do that because I'm observing myself do it. And so energy, passion, and the sun all get me up every day.
Wonderful. And finally, what was your best day?
Well, I'm going to interpret that question as my best day as ahead of school and the types of things that I've been spending the last 7 years writing about in the way to Pancho's Kitchen. And because I think somehow, strangely, the best days have taken me to deep, out of the way moments. One of my best days was just waiting for kids on a field trip, an expedition we took, to wake up while I was just in the pre-dawn writing with a candle, looking out over mountains, just thinking about how wonderful these kids are. And they're teenagers. Yeah, they're sleeping longer than they should. And one time, another pre-dawn moment, just having spent years fundraising and building a new building for our campus, and finding out that it leaks and getting there before anybody even knew about it with another candle and catching the drip. Those are my greatest moments.
Well, we are grateful that you have spent these many moments with us here on the program. And we do look forward to having you back, because we had talked just before we started this particular conversation about another one that we might have. So we'll talk about that when we're finished here. Again, thank you so much for being with us. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy, because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for being in my life and letting me be in yours. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.